What's going on, everybody? Rodrigo here with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. This month of June, and I think this is going to be the first episode, but if it's not, you'll have already heard this message. We're just focusing on like personal protection for properties and in general. You know, we're going to have conversations with insurance, this conversations with estate planning, trusts and wills. We're also going to have conversations about like personal finances and just in general where things are going with the economy. So, but today we talked with Lorin Page. He's a estate attorney, tax attorney here in the area, and we talk a little bit about everything. The main focus of the conversation was estate planning, and I found that it was really hard for this conversation to go really in depth. So we kind of just jumped around, explained the topics, talked about the mentality around, estate planning, why people don't like to talk about it, and really how to set yourself up for success so that if you've been accumulating assets and you've been building wealth, that you have that transfer go as smoothly and as effectively as possible. So I really hope you guys enjoy the conversation with Lorin. All of his contact information's in our show notes. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to him and enjoy our conversation. Take care, and thanks so much for tuning in. Well, Lorin, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you.
My pleasure. I've always wanted to be on a podcast. First
time?
Yeah, that's right.
Good. Well, hopefully there won't be any awkward pauses then as you for your first experience.
That's on you.
Well, so many places to begin. I don't know if I actually told you this or not, so this might be catching you off guard. So this is going to be coming out. I know it's mid-July right now, but this is going to come out in June. And for the most part of the month of June, we're going to be focusing on like shoring up personal quote unquote assets, responsibility, et cetera. So we're going to be talking about like insurance. Today we're talking, states, trusts, whatnot, and just, different things on the personal finance level. But so yeah, that's kind of the focus of this conversation. But before we even get there,
all right,
what about you? Like, how'd you get to Asheville? What's your backstory? Give us a little bit of a context about who you are and everything.
I got to Asheville because my parents were hippies and they settled. They were back to the land hippies in the late 70s, early 80s. Mm-hmm. And so they came out to Hendersonville and tried to live off the land, and then they realized that wasn't going to happen. And so then they kind of mainstream. But I was born here, and then I spent a lot of my life in South Florida. Mm-hmm. Bounced basically between here and South Florida because we couldn't decide where we wanted to be.
Yeah.
And my wife and I and two kids now live up here in Mills River. We've been here I've been here basically on and off for the last 15 years as my primary residence.
Mm-hmm. But you made it, when did it come back, like as far as the move to Mills River and like kind of resetting roots down here then?
Well, so about 2 years ago, I moved back up here from working in a law firm in Orlando, and we were in Hendersonville. Yeah. And then we sold that house and we moved to Mills River about a year ago.
So I know you said back and forth. Was there a decision or was there a specific reason why it became like permanent? And you're like, well, we're not going back now. We're here.
I told myself several times that it was permanent. I don't say that anymore. Nothing's permanent, but this is our primary residence. I mean, listen, It's
permanent until it's not then.
Yeah, it's semi-permanent, right? Who wouldn't want to live the snowbird lifestyle for a little bit? A couple months in the winter, go down to Florida basically. But no, this is where I've always wanted to be and where I want to live. I mean, this is where my heart is. It's I always felt like it's in my blood, and I wouldn't live anywhere else if I had my druthers.
Yeah, I think the mountains are like, I grew up in the mountains and Bogota, Colombia, so right in the middle, and it's spectacular. Mm-hmm. But there's something about the like Appalachian Mountains that, especially here, that there is like that sort of like magnetic like mysticism to them in a sense, right? It's like, well, my parents, it's hard to get away from it. Like no matter what, it's just like you look and you're like, this place is amazing. So happy, fortunate to live here. So
you may not have known this, or you may have, but the crystal hippies that my parents
I didn't know there was such a thing as crystal hippies.
Yeah, okay. This crystal will heal you.
Okay, gotcha.
We'll tell you that Asheville area and Black Mountain in particular is a spiritual vortex.
Really?
So that's why, yeah.
Huh. Learn something new every day. That's good. Yeah. So did any of that crystal hippiness carry over to you, or was that just kind of like cool to have like context of. And,
it was it's not real like hardcore. We weren't, but I knew enough of the real hardcore ones to get some good jokes out of it. But no, I'm pleasantly kind of agnostic about those kind of things.
Heard.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's too much trouble to sort it out.
Yeah. Well, interesting transition. I didn't know about I'm sure you've mentioned it. I probably just forgot it. So, but going from that hippie-esque lifestyle with your parents and whatnot, and now you're an attorney, was that a natural progression, or was it kind of like a swing, a momentum swing, if you're like going the other way and doing a lot more structure-oriented, lifestyle, like living, et cetera? So
I'm going to disclaim and say that I'm not throwing my parents under the bus. They were fantastic parents.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, but a little tongue-in-cheek, they sold out and went corporate after a few years. So I'm the youngest of four. And so I actually didn't really grow up that way that much, but like my oldest sister did, and my other siblings, kind of on a sliding scale of
had less and less exposure.
Yes, and so I was just like basically,
you heard the stories.
I was another white suburban kid in South Florida for most of my high school.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
dude,
either way, so
for sure, dude.
Second half of that question still applies. How'd you end up going, or why law school? I mean, like, what happened to drive you to that world, and how long have you been doing it?
So I actually went to law school because of what I kind of call, during a lot of people during their younger 20s have what I call, somebody else also calls the messianic phase. Save the world, and so I went to law school because I was going to save the world. And
how were you going to save the world in that phase?
What was selling out?
What was the dream in that moment?
I thought that I was pretty sure I was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay.
Okay.
So that was on there, and then I was going to kind of shore up the rest of the Bill of Rights and civil liberties and protect our children's heritage. And I still am very much a civil libertarian, but you don't get hired to work in those kind of jobs unless you know somebody or went to Harvard. And so kind of got out of school, and I was like, and I got a little bit of experience with the criminal justice system, doing public defending work, enough to get pretty cynically burned out.
Disenchanted?
With it. Yeah. I mean, whatever the squared version of disenchanted is, it was just, it's an abysmal system, and it's really broken deeply and tragically, as we're all kind of learning now.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but
Get
now
topical.
That you did.
Get topical.
What, I mean, just from a quick overarching, if you've been in that system, I've heard lots, smart people on both sides of the table, make their comments on it. And, I think the fact that there's so many people on both sides of that whole divide shows that how complicated it is, and being up close and personal to, everything that has to do with the criminal justice system right now. Like, what do you think? Like, what's step one? Like, let's not even worry about like the end goal. What's like step one?
Well, I mean, step one is returning criminalization to things that are harmful to others, is the eradication of, in law school they call it, there's a division of crimes in malum prohibitum and malum in se. And so it means it's bad in and of itself. Like, you murder somebody, it's pretty bad.
Right.
Bad because it's prohibited. It's wrong because somebody said it's
There's
wrong. You go smoking
a
doobie in your backyard. So different kinds of wrong. And criminal law needs to gravitate away from kind of cultural programming back towards protection of individuals from actual harm. And I think kind of the things that most people are saying aren't. Most people that have been thinking about these things won't be surprised to hear me say, well, I mean, the drug war is a big part of the problem. There's been, in the last 20 or 30 years, you can research it, a dramatic escalation in the militarization of police due to the surplus of heavy military machinery that's kind of being sold by government contractors and sold by the military because they don't need it all anymore. And there's been an escalation in kind of the training that results in violent encounters. And, look, I'm not a radical leftist or anything. We just need to be a little bit more mature about how we police things. If somebody has manifestly, clearly mental health issues because they're, talking to voices on the corner, you don't need to bring 2 squad cars. You need some mental health intervention. So there's a lot of things like that people that are smarter and more informed than I think would be appropriate. But basically, the real problem, if you want to boil it down into a sentence, is that we have this fictitious presumption of innocence in our criminal justice system, when in reality the entire system is designed to presume guilt of somebody who's arrested. So that is the real lie at the core of our criminal justice system, that if you get arrested, there's an innocent until proven guilty, but that's not how it works.
You're
already guilty once you're in the squad car.
Yeah, wow. I had not heard that yet, so that is an interesting perspective.
It's true. I mean, go into any trial, and you'll just see people be like, "Oh, I don't want to take the risk that this guy was guilty. Let's just get him off the street." So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So Colombia, you're typically 9 out of 10 times, 9.5 out of 10 times, you're guilty until proven innocent. Yeah. So it's definitely a different approach.
Yeah, and prosecutors they layer charges on so that one act ends up resulting in 4 charges, and then you're looking at 25 years where you plea out, and so you didn't do it, but you have the logical choice is to plead guilty, and then you're done. Yeah. You're a felon. So that's not.
Yeah, that's challenging.
So I got burned out on that, and I realized it was time to kind of grow up and make some money. And my dad died pretty young, and I had an interest in estate planning, kind of related to that. And I went to law school, and I realized that criminal law was the antithesis of optimistic idealism. It was just being ground down by a system that didn't care about anything. And I thought, all right, well, I can kind of interested in estate planning, and I kind of interested in business and money, and so I went back to school after my JD, after my law degree, to get a master's in tax law at UF, and became a tax estate planning business attorney.
Yeah, and that's how we met, was having estate / wills, trust conversations and things like that. So we buy houses from people all the time that don't have paperwork in order to make that transition of assets or wealth easy. And I think once you've been exposed to it a couple of times, you get acutely aware of how that lack of foresight really has a terrible trickle-down effect. More often than not, the amount of people we've talked to that are like, well, we were friends until our parents, like I was friends with my brothers and sisters until my parents passed away, and then we fought about this house for 10 years, and and it's very common, unfortunately. What is it that you think keeps people from taking proactive steps in that arena?
Normal inertia. More than 50% of people, I think the statistic is that more than 50% of people die without a will.
How is that? Like, I don't know. Like, how is that possible in a place where you can?
A lot of people don't have anything to transfer, but
even people who have like 50% of people, like, does that include? Like, I guess I don't know. It seems like you can go get a will for like, I don't know, like $300, $500.
You
like,
can.
At least it's not going to be a great one, but it's better than nothing, right?
I guess the way I look at it is, what is that one chore around your house that you just put off till the very end, the last thing you want to do?
I don't know.
I don't know
probably
either.
Like,
but that's a state planning for a lot of people. They don't want to think
probably
about
laundry for most people, right?
For me too. Yeah. I hate laundry.
Nobody's get excited about that. Yeah.
Me. I hate like laundry. I don't mind dishes, but laundry makes me want to just crawl out the window.
Right.
But that's estate planning. It's like your psychological dirty laundry. First, I have a lot of sympathy in a way for life insurance salesmen, because they're selling a product that nobody wants and everybody needs.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but nobody wants to talk about it. They don't want to think about it.
So then maybe there's a step back on that, right? Like, why does nobody want to talk about it? Like, what do you think that leads to this? I mean, like, there are very few things we know for sure are always going to happen. One of them is that we're going to die, right? Like, why is it that the fact that you think there's so much knowledge around this and so much certainty that there's, like, even laundry, like, you can wear dirty clothes, Like, it's not like there's a way out of something like that.
Yeah, but, one of the answers to that is people say, well, it's just not my problem. They can sort it out after I'm dead. So that's not the right approach. But, the other reason is, to be fair, death is the big fear. It's the big one. It's the one thing that everybody basically at some point of their life or most of their life is afraid of. And so, I give people a little bit of a pass to say, look, if you don't want to think about your laundry, that's one thing. If you don't want to think about how your relationship is on the rocks, that's another thing. If you don't think about death, death is terrifying to most people. And most people that need planning have children and grandchildren. And thinking about death means thinking about their own death and their children's death and it's just
paralyzing.
Ugly. And most people, most people, especially as we kind of drift away from being moored in our spiritual traditions, don't have a good paradigm through which to understand it. And so we don't have a good story to tell ourselves about it. And so we just don't think about it. We're kind of an impulsive, and in a good way to some extent, we're a very life-affirming kind of a young, impulsive
that's
culture.
where the focus is at for sure.
Yeah.
How do you how do you get clients then if nobody's wanting to talk about it? Like, how is it,
people grow up, they get older.
And so have you noticed if there's a certain age group where it starts to wow, people around 30, 40, 50 or whatever?
Yeah, so level of assets is a variable, but excluding that, I'd say basically your average estate planning client comes in to you around age 50. And they've got to the point where the kids are out of school. Maybe they had some, LegalZoom crappy will that they did, or power of attorney they put in place when they went to, vacation in Cuba or something. But around 50, most people,
they start thinking.
I think that for the people that come in around 50, they've already been thinking about it, and finally, for almost everybody, there's a long lead in. It's one of those, I should do that someday. So that's when most people come in.
Yeah.
And then usually they're repeat customers until they pass. But most people don't want to think about it. It's very different if people have assets that need legal protection. So people that have LLCs, that have businesses that get into the estate or the asset protection world, do it a lot sooner. And when you were talking about insurance and kind of that aspect of financial savvy, I think of that. I think of almost all of what I do, even the estate planning, is a form of asset protection.
No, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think that it's all about figuring out. Most people who are actively trying to accumulate assets, maybe just in my experience, but I feel like they're doing it because it's more than just about them. It's also about their kids and generational, trying to figure out how are we going to create some generational momentum here, wealth, and then if you do that and don't do the other, then it defeats the purpose, right? So I think that people who are doing that are pretty aware, but what about the people who aren't necessarily active in those areas? How do you get them to? Do you ever have to convince people, or are people pre-sold when they come to talk to you? I guess that would be the other question.
Well, 50-50.
Really?
Some people are pre-sold on basic. I just want to get a will done, but don't talk to me about any of your fancy bells and whistles and trusts. And I say, okay, but we're going to leave all your assets outright to your 25-year-old kid who has $100,000 of student loan debt and a sketchy fiance. Do you want to do that? And then I have to, to some extent, I have to sell them on the realities of it, because the real problem is that even the people that are conscientious and smart and good at acquiring and developing and building wealth still don't like to think about their own death, and they still don't oftentimes like the idea of the encumbrances or the what you have to give up to have protection. If I tell you that you're going to leave your assets in a trust for your children because they're going to be protected from their student loan debts and their own stupidity, then you say, well, okay, what is this trust? And there's somebody else in the picture. There's a trustee that is administering it for them. And wait, they can be their own trustee sometimes, but let's just give it to them. And if they lose it, whatever.
It's on them.
Yeah. And I'm not telling them that that's wrong. I tell them,
just be aware,
be educated about it, and understand that outright distributions are, in our day and age, this is what I think that most of our parents' generation don't understand. I'm 37.
Yeah.
Nobody in my generational cohort that understands asset protection wants an outright distribution. Nobody wants it. It's a nightmare. It's because if you give it to me in a trust, you can talk to me and set it up in a way that works for us. I can have my cake and eat it too. But if you leave it to me outright and I accept it and I run over a car full of doctors the next day,
it's gone.
I was a conduit for my inheritance, so.
Well, yeah, I do want to dive into that a little bit. I guess, is there anything else that's worth exploring when it comes into the mental side of things as far as people making that decision or avoiding it? Because I think before we even get into talking about what a trust is or what a will is, which I want to get to, I think it's like, what's the mental side of thing or what's the emotional aversion to it? Because I think that's...
Well, there's what we talked about. Yeah. There's thinking about death. The other thing is lawyers. Mm-hmm. You got to go to a lawyer to do it. And it's oftentimes, I will tell you, as from an insider, oftentimes the process of dealing with a lawyer, it could be a nightmare. And you're doing this hourly billing clock with a really big hourly rate, and you don't.
It's just daunting.
You've got this like vague liability, like, well, it could be this amount or it could be 10 times that amount. That's how people feel about it, and they don't trust lawyers, partially because of the fee structure is kind of conducive to ambiguity that ends up costing them money. That's a part of it, and then a lot of people, just think that they'll do it later and they die younger than they think. There's a lot of different reasons. But I will tell you, to tie it in a little bit, and this addresses both the psychological part of it and also kind of ties into what you do.
Yeah.
You are involved with people that own real estate. Mm-hmm. And some of those people own real estate that is not residential. And some of those people, some of the people I've seen, own numerous parcels of real estate. Mm-hmm. I had a client one time with 10 residential real estate houses that he owned in his own name. So why doesn't that person put him in an LLC? Answer that psychological question, and then the answer to that's the same thing as the answer for estate planning.
But there is an answer to that question, though, because the part of that is asset protection in the sense, right? Because in North Carolina, you've got the spouse thing. I forget what the word is, right? Where it automatically transfers. And so there is a reason for that. Like, some of that is you hold it in your own name because it automatically transfers to your spouse. And there's some protections there as well, right?
But those don't protect you against
liability.
Let's talk about kind of because there's lots of different.
All right. Yes, I want to go. Yes. No, which is good. Okay. I had one other question, though, on the front side of that. Yeah. Before we deep dive, which we're on the precipice of doing, is there anybody that you're like, hey, you know what? It's not worth it to even do a will. Is there a point when that makes sense, or is it always do a will bare minimum, and then depending on where you're at in life and what you're doing, then you get into some more of the complicated, in deeper issues?
There are lots of instances in which you might not need a will, but you're not going to really know what those are without talking to an attorney. So if you want to do the cheapest version of an estate plan, go do a legal. If you
just a 1 hour conversation.
Because look, if all of your assets are in an IRA or 401k, there's nothing to go through a will. Those don't pass through will. Those pass through the beneficiary designation. If you have life insurance, if all of your assets are, if your only asset is in your home and it's jointly titled with your kid, then it's not going to go through. So there's sometimes assets don't go through wills. Yeah. So some people take all of their will assets and push them out, but it's possible, but it's not smart.
So it depends, but not likely.
It's not. There are a few instances in which it's a good idea, but basically no. Basically, start with a will.
Cool. Well, let's do it. How about, can you give us some definitions of some of the terms that might come up as we deep dive into this a little bit more? Or would it be easier for me to give you names and then you define them?
I don't know. You tell me. All right. I'll tell you what a power of attorney is.
Okay.
We talk about estate planning. There are a few basic documents. Mm-hmm. A durable power of attorney is a document that gives someone, your spouse, your mom, the ability to write checks and to sell your house, to deal with your money if you're incapacitated, if you're in a coma.
Right.
A healthcare power of attorney does the same thing for healthcare choices. Those instruments only exist up until the point you die.
Yeah.
As soon as you die, they go away. They have no legal reality. Mm-hmm. At that point, your assets are going to be transferred often, usually through a will, and a will is a document that it's a creature of state law. There's a statute in North Carolina that says, hey, you can make a will, and when you die, you take it to the courthouse, and the clerk of court will make sure your things go to the right places. With the help of the executor, will take it, and the clerk of court will oversee it. A will is a document that transfers assets through probate, which is a court process, like a lawsuit in a sense, to your creditors, if you have any, and if not, whatever's left to your named beneficiaries. It is one of the attorneys I worked with one time says it's like a lawsuit you file against yourself after you're dead for the benefit of your creditors. And it is. And then a trust is the best way to think about a trust in a short kind of little nugget is it's like a LLC. It's a legal entity. It owns things. So if Rodrigo, you have an LLC and you die, the LLC doesn't die. So if you put everything in your LLC or your trust, and the trust says, when I die, this is what happens, then we have bypassed the probate process because now Rodrigo doesn't own anything in his own name.
Right.
Everything's owned in the name of the trust. We still get the distribution of the assets, and there's still some oversight in the form of a trustee, but we have bypassed the cost and hassle of probate.
Right.
So those are the basic instruments.
Do you always want to stay out of probate?
No. I mean, most of the time it's better to stay out of probate if you have kind of a certain level of assets because it's just too expensive and it's better to spend the money on the front end doing the planning. Doing a trust-based planning is really like doing the probate on the front end. You do kind of the heavy lifting on the front end, putting everything into the one box, and then we skip court later.
And then you pass away, basically hit play essentially, and then things happen.
It's a lot like that. I mean, if you're lucky. Now, if there's a lot of assets, it could still be play, it can be a long song, but
the steps are at least in a lot of ways predetermined essentially, right? Like or
yes.
the theory or the thought process behind them?
Yes. And you have there's usually more thought through. You avoid probate. There's privacy component because probate can ultimately, even if it's private during the pendency of probate, at the end it becomes public record.
It's all public.
And there's costs. In Florida, probate's enormously expensive. It's not as bad up here. But
yeah. Wow. Well, let's talk from a real estate perspective. What is, I don't know, just overarching question is like, what's your opinion on what a structure should be if you own real estate as an individual, or if you've got a family, and what's the best way to make sure that transfers in a good way to minimize tax burden and cost and protection?
So if you own residential real estate that is your house, that is personal residence, then you either have a will. Well, I don't want to get into there's some legal nuances there, but
yeah, I mean, this is just generic, right?
But,
so yeah,
but you don't need to have it in an LLC basically if it's your house you live in. If you have residential rental or commercial rental real estate, you should have it in an LLC unless it's basically bankrupt. If there's any value or equity in what you own, you should probably have it in an LLC. I'm an attorney, so of course I think that. But the question really ends up being, okay, I've got 10 properties. How many LLCs do I need? So that's the more difficult question.
How many LLCs do I need if I have 10
Depends how much equity you have in each property. But there's a cost-benefit analysis. So if you have 10 houses and you have $5,000 in equity in each, there's nothing to protect really, right? But if you've got 80% equity in each of them, then put it, for goodness sake, in a separate LLC, because you don't want somebody breaking their neck on the porch in one house and being able to attach all of your 10 houses.
But wouldn't insurance cover that?
Sometimes it will, but you look at your insurance contract and you tell me.
I mean, I'm just assuming you have a good insurance contract. Would it not be cheaper and easier to just pay higher premiums?
First of all, you should have insurance. So any estate planning or asset protection.
We're having a whole conversation on insurance specifically too.
No,
so yeah.
Usually what I tell people is, listen.
Yeah.
The first thing you should do is get insurance.
Right. That's the first step, right?
It's necessary but not sufficient, in my opinion. And the reason is that there are coverage gaps and exclusions. There's insolvency of insurance companies. There are coverage. I think I said coverage limits, and there's exclusions. There's also there's the possibility that your insurance company stonewalls you a little bit, and then you have to end up litigating and fighting them. So is often enough for most people, but there are a lot of instances in which the claims exceed your policy coverage. You know, if somebody breaks in their neck and they sue you for $10 million, most people aren't going to have a $10 million umbrella coverage. And if you do, you're going to probably fight that insurance company for 6 years trying to get them to pay.
That's fair. I totally forgot where we were going with that. Sorry.
Insurance, asset protection.
But and I guess we're going to come back to that. I do want to. You said two things. You said something about repeat customers. How do you have repeat customers in this business? And then I'll ask the next one. Sorry, go for it.
Oh, well, you'd be amazed at how often.
Is it just revisions or what is that?
Revisions, yeah.
Because I could see that
revisions.
I mean, I'm 30, so anything I do now, I'm probably going to have a different opinion or hopefully more assets 10 years from now and have a different, idea of how you're going to distribute or move through things, which brings me to my second point. So I guess that makes sense. Outright distributions. Why is that something that people should avoid? Because it sounds like that's what you're advocating for.
People should avoid it unless they thought about it. People should make it
intentional.
Default should be against it.
And so if you're doing that, you want to say if you're going outright distribution, make sure it's an intentional thought process?
Yes, and the reason is that if you leave assets to someone in a trust, they can be their own trustee, meaning they get the money when they determine, according to the rules set forth in the trust, and they're responsible for interpreting them. But as a practical matter, the encumbrances are minor, and the protection is profound. I mean, an inherited trust share is one of the strongest forms of asset protection you can have in Anglo-American jurisprudence. It's almost impenetrable.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. So I think that one of the things we always advocate, would love to buy properties owner financed, and somebody who's on the older side, they sometimes give pushback. They're like, well, I'm probably only going to live 10 more years. I'm always like, yeah, well, oftentimes, do you really trust that your heirs are going to make a good decision with $100,000 cash that just shows up one day for them? Or are they going to make better decisions if they have a consistent drip of money? And I guess it's kind of the same thing, right? You're trying to set up better decision making for folks if you might not trust what 100%. Your heirs are going to do. Is that the theory?
Yeah, you're an annuity company for their heirs. I mean, instead of giving them $100,000, you've annuitized it for them over the period of the mortgage.
I'm going to have to use that. I like that, yeah. Become an annuity program.
I mean, annuities are bad financial investments, and they're fantastic for asset protection. You want to talk about asset protection?
Yeah.
Of course, if you're already being sued, it's probably too late. But,
it's too late for the conversation.
Yeah, but for the most part, I mean, if you see it coming down the road and you say, all right, well, I'm going to turn all this big chunk of change into an annuity, and now I don't have $200,000 for my creditor. I've only got $30 bucks every day, whatever, $3,000 a month, whatever.
How is the best way for somebody to get started into this topic and really figuring out what's best for them? Because I feel like I'm familiar with it, but even now having this conversation, sometimes it's like, whoa, there's just so much to think about and there's so much out there. So what's the best starting point to learn or think about what questions I should ask for myself and things to read, or what needs to be considered to make the right decisions and to ask the right questions?
I mean, most people are better off going to an attorney, but if you're smart, you can figure it out yourself. The real question is, think about the people that you care about. Think about what you're spending your life energy doing, making this money, and realize that you're going to die at some point, and there's going to be a legacy, and maybe it's for your kids or your church or your charities of choice, your community. But think about the people that you care about, and then realize that there are sharks in the water. Realize that things go wrong. Families fracture. The core of my estate planning philosophy is conflict avoidance. What I tell when people come in initial consultation, I say my main job is to make sure that your kids don't kill each other or hate each other. That
at the end of this,
because it happens and it's so avoidable. But just think about the people you care about and say, how can I take some reasonably moderate measures to protect them? It's like life insurance.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that we should have touched on?
Sure.
And I mean, without doing I guess we could deep dive. We got some time.
We talked about the criminal justice system. We talked about estate planning. Yeah, man.
But no, more specific to the estate planning.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just it's something that I'm loosely familiar with, so I can't. Sometimes it's really hard to know how to approach a conversation and where to go with it when you're, when you know it's important to have, but you don't necessarily know what the important pieces of it. And I guess that's kind of where I don't want to do too much guiding and just be like recognizing that there's a lot out there and I mean, that's why you're here. So like, did we touch on everything, or is there something we haven't touched on that we need to like look at?
Well, I mean, I think we've touched on the core facets of it. There are innumerable kind of nuanced, detailed things. I will say that, if you don't do anything else, the bulk of most people's money is going to be in 401ks and IRAs. If you never do a will, or you never do a trust, or you never do a power of attorney, make sure your beneficiary designations are accurate and updated. You'd be amazed at how many exes inherit money.
That's hilarious.
Get changed after a divorce. So.
That's terrible funny.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's it.
Well, so let's transition a little bit. One of the other things, I know you just had a transition, and so curious to know maybe you can share what the transition was. I'd love to know what the thought process was and how you're feeling now.
Good. I resigned my position with a traditional firm. Was at McGuire, would visit in town for a long time, and they're great. And I just, when you work for a traditional firm, they own your time, and so you don't get to decide totally what you want to do with it. Right. And I enjoy what I do. But I want to be able to guide my kind of career development in some areas. I want to go away from those things I was doing and towards these things. Yeah. Opportunity zones. I love talking about that. I'm interested in that. Tax law stuff. Not as much tax controversy. And the other thing is that I, like you, have got some entrepreneurial spirit and some things that I want to try. And unlike you, I don't have this vast amount of time ahead of me. I'm not as young as you, so I have to do it now. No, I just decided that it was, this kind of weird little window of time we're in. It was had a sort of an epiphany and said, all right, well, I've really always wanted to do this. And like one of my clients said to me when I told him he said, well, yeah, good, go scratch the itch. So it's an itch scratch.
Good, yeah. Do you have a specific moment that you can think back and be like, that made the decision like come full circle, and you're like, it's happening. I'm going out on my own. My
wife will tell you with great lamentation that I make decisions gradually. The bigger, the more gradually. But I did have, I couldn't remember the date or the time, but I did have sort of a realization where the intellectual processes kind of gradually aligned with my emotional body, and it clicked. And I thought, okay, I wanted to do this. I don't like doing this, and now it feels right. It doesn't, and so, it was during the COVID coronavirus thing where I was working from home, and I realized I've got 2 young children, and wife and I really loved working from home, and I just thought, I don't think I can go back. This is too much.
This is where you wanted to be.
This is too much. Yeah, this is too close to where I want to be. Yeah. In terms of lifestyle.
Did you have anything that you're nervous or kind of had a little bit of fear around that you had to work through?
Oh yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, I gave up a good job with a good salary at a great firm to go out on my own. I mean, of course, it'd be insane not to. It's very nerve-wracking, but kind of going back to my crystal parents' roots, my New Year's resolution.
Come full circle here. I love it.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that's kind of how you're supposed to wrap it up. I kind of decided, look, I just this year my New Year's resolution was I'm gonna kind of try to let go of the fear-motivated decision making. Yeah. And I kind of made a deal with the devil by doing that. I didn't realize it was going to unravel everything.
3 months later.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but that's really what it came down to, is that I didn't want to live out of that place anymore because it was just suffocating and depleting. And I realized, if I'm resourceful. I can get a job. I can start a firm. And I will be fine. Yeah. So I am. Having said that, I'm kind of, there's some nervousness, but it's really it's very exciting now because I've wanted to do it for so long, and it's daunting, but it's exciting, and now I'll know.
Awesome, man. Well, super excited for you to see what happens. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they need to get some clarity on? I think we kind of went not in a necessarily super cohesive linear way of conversation, so.
Unbelievable. I can't believe that happened. Well, my name is Lorin Page, and my website is, the law office is the Lorin G Page. Is going to be rolling rolling off here soon.
Okay.
I just left about a week ago, so it's not here yet. I've also got one of my side business projects is related to electronic estate planning, online estate planning. I do have a website up right now that I'm licensed in Florida and North Carolina, and Florida has led the way to some extent with digital. So Florida has a law that says, hey, you can actually notarize your will and your trust and all of your documents online, video conference notarizing. So if you're trapped in a hospital with COVID and you can't get anything done, we can do it now.
Cool.
And so the first business, I'm going to keep doing my traditional law firm, but that website is Florida Online Estate Planning Attorney. And that one is up, and the law office is Lorin Page. Is not up yet, but it will be.
Might be by the time this goes live.
Yeah, that's right. I'll go home and tap.
Now you got pressure to get the date going.
That's right. Okay, when's it coming out?
I don't know. Probably like mid-June-ish. So.
Well, it's mid-June now.
Or sorry, mid-July.
Okay.
Yeah. So give or take 20, 30 days.
The law office is LorinGPage.com.
We'll find out. We'll find out if it's going to be up and running now. Yeah.
We'll see. You'll find me though. If you Google Asheville estate planning, I'll come up. But and otherwise, just call Rodrigo here, and he'll hook you up.
I don't do any estate planning, so.
No, he'll hook you up with me.
Oh, okay. Yes, yeah. Just as to say, let's be clear about this. Awesome, Lorin. Thanks so much for joining the show, man. Any parting words or?
No. It's great to talk to you guys. Just listen. Do something. Don't do nothing. You got people you care about. You've got assets that you have. Connect the two of them somehow. Don't leave the people you care about in the wind, trying to figure out what you would have wanted and fighting with their siblings about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lorin.
Good times.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As always, please share and leave us a review there on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you might be listening to this. Take care and see you all on the next one.